Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, whenever it is that you happen to be listening to this talk. Thank you for listening. And I know that some of you are, because I sometimes get feedback. And the idea that somebody is listening, or that people want to listen, encourages me to give a talk. So thank you. That civilization may not sink, its great battle lost. Quiet the dog, tether the pony to a distant post. Our master Caesar is in the tent where the maps are spread, his eyes fixed upon nothing, a hand under his head. Like the long-legged fly upon the stream, his mind moves upon silence. So this second line, its great battle lost. What is that great battle of civilization? There's a wonderful book, if you don't mind reading sci-fi, a wonderful book by Philip K. Dick called A Maze of Death. Wonderful title, wonderful book. The story is that there is a spaceship and its engines have packed in. They are kaput. And there's no hope of being able to fix the engines. And the spaceship has fallen into the gravitational field of a star. Or at least it was in the gravitational field before the engines went kaput and when the engines went kaput. So it's slowly orbiting this star, and it's only a matter of time before it spirals into it and all the crew are consumed. A little bit like Icarus, except Icarus just fell to the sea and he survived. So the crew, having nothing better to do, they program the computer and they get into their little pods with connecting electrodes to their brain, I suppose. And the computer creates a virtual world. This was written in the 60s. The computer creates a virtual world and they have the illusion of landing on that world. And because the crew are all scientists and technicians, they just get on with investigating this planet that they have just arrived on, forgetting their actual story of being locked on a ship that's orbiting a star and that the ship is doomed. So the computer generates this virtual world and projects these crew members onto it, and they carry on with their investigation. And nobody is quite sure why they are there. Nobody can actually remember the mission, so-called, because they are obviously astronauts and they must be on a mission. But to give them some kind of sense, they have to forget their predicament in order to be able to be authentically on this virtual world. And eventually, because they're making all these investigations into the plant life, and I don't know if there's any animal life on the planet, they're making all these investigations and the computer has to generate some kind of answer, or the limits of the computer are being tested or being challenged. And eventually, there's so many questions that the computer is trying to answer, the world begins to disintegrate and everybody reappears or reemerges in their little capsule on board the doomed ship. So they take a break and they have a chat, and then they go in for another round. This is the way they pass their time on a ship that has nowhere to go except into its destruction in the nearby star. It's kind of a wonderful metaphor for life. We know that where we're going is death. So how are we going to spend our time between now and then? There's one occasion where one of the crew members comes back from the disintegration of the planet and decides, I can't do that again. He realizes that all he's doing is distracting himself, and that what he really needs to do is face the reality of his situation. So what is this great battle or great mission of civilization? I feel as though the great battle was won a long time ago. But we didn't recognize it, and we didn't know what to do with it. It's as though in fighting the battle, we forgot what we were fighting for. Or maybe what we were fighting for was not the real what we were fighting for, and so the battle continues. Were we not fighting for security? Was the great battle not being fought so that everybody would have enough food, clothing, shelter. We won that battle. We got to that place quite a while ago. Bertrand Russell, in the middle of the last century, wrote, "Few seem to realize that we have within our means," I'm paraphrasing, I'm not quoting literally, paraphrasing. "Few seem to realize that we have within our means the potential to create paradise on earth." But we don't seem to have known, and we still don't know, how to realize that. He said, we have the means, the technology, to bring about a situation where everybody has enough. But that's part of our human predicament. It seems we never have enough, or we don't recognize it when we do. So Captain Bligh, and I'll call him Captain Bligh because it's easier than saying Lieutenant or Lieutenant Bligh. And I know from the movie at least that he really wanted to be a captain. He brought the ship, the Bounty, to Tahiti. And there they stayed for 5 months. And I'm sure for the crew, who mostly lived on the island during that 5 months, I'm sure they felt they had landed in paradise. Friendly people, the company and familiarity of women, ample food, little work, little discipline. And when they left the island, maybe they longed to actually stay there or go back to it. And the harsh reality of sailing a ship across the ocean, the Pacific, overcrowded, stormy weather, rationed food. I'm sure the memory of paradise acted as a great carrot, something that they longed to get back to, the freedom, the simplicity, the lack of, was it a lack of civilization? Captain Bligh describes them, the crew, and the country that they've come from as being civilized, and reminds them, we are civilized. But when you look when you compare Tahiti with the crew and how they behave, you have to ask yourself, who is the more civilized? And that's totally open to debate. Tahiti was not like most of the surrounding islands, which were hostile and cannibalistic. Something made Tahiti different. They were civilized in their own way, and their civilization was different than that of the crew where they had come from, England. So as these crew left Tahiti and faced again the harsh reality of their life, there was the carrot of going back to paradise. And there was the stick of the authoritarian and disciplined command of Bligh. And I think Bligh, on his part, he felt as though his authority was beginning to slip and sensed a lack of discipline among the crew. So he became more authoritarian and disciplinarian in order to assert his command. And that was the stick. And between the carrot and the stick, the crew thought mutiny was the answer. I can't help thinking that maybe if they had been more circumspect, if they had embodied in themselves what was known at the time as the 4 cardinal virtues, everybody may have fared better. If they could have put their minds together to say, we want to get back to paradise, there may be a way that when we get back to England, we can find a ship that is going in the direction of Tahiti and work our way for them to drop us off in Tahiti. Maybe there was a better way of getting what they wanted. The 4 cardinal virtues. I think I first came across them in Christianity. But later, when I was reading Plato's Republic, I came across them there in a slightly different formulation, but the same ones. So these are the 4 cardinal virtues of antiquity, or the ancient Greece and Roman cultures. If I can remember them now, courage, self-discipline, wisdom, and justice. And the whole thrust of Plato's Republic is to find out what is justice. And it turns out that at least in Plato's Republic, justice is the virtue that balances the other virtues. Just to have courage without self-discipline isn't going to work. And to have self-discipline without courage isn't going to work. And we need wisdom to guide these other virtues. But wisdom on its own isn't enough. So what we need is something that regulates these other three virtues, and that is justice. Later in Christianity, or earlier in my case, because I came across it in Christianity first, it was wisdom, morality, temperance, and possibly courage, I don't know. Temperance is an interesting one. Temperance has this connotation of iron is tempered in the furnace. It's made into something more suitable to purpose. So we become tempered or given more structure, more character. And then our passions are like contained or constrained so that we become more tempered. And then there are times when we lose our temper. We lose our self-discipline or our self-restraint. So even of the day, in about 1780 something, the crew of the Bounty may have had a working framework that could have helped them resolve the situation in a way that was better somehow for everybody. But they didn't. They committed their act of mutiny and went back to paradise, only to be told, you can't stay here. Wow. Few seem to realize that we have within our means the potential to create paradise on earth. It's like the yellow submarine. As we live our life of ease, every one of us has all they need. So where is this spaceship, Earth, going? And what are we doing? And what are we to do? How are we to live? That civilization may not sink. Its great battle lost. What is civilization? A year or two ago, I think more like 2 years ago, I started a book that fascinated me. I think I only read about 20 pages, and the book is at least as thick as the Blue Cliff Record. But fortunately, in those 20 pages, I got the gist of what Spangler was talking about. His book was written just over 100 years ago, and it's called Decline of the West. From his perspective, the West, Europe, America, Australia, was already in decline 100 years ago. Which is quite interesting, because the time of Captain Bligh and the Bounty was just before the invention of Stephenson's rocket, or the internal combustion engine. Well, that was an external combustion engine, which led to the locomotive, the train. And there's a beautiful exploration of the shift from local time to standard time in a book called Time Lord. And it's a beautiful title because it's about this shift from local time to standard time, from the local timekeeping on a county level to standard time on a national level, but also to global standard time and the 24-hour clock, or the 24-hour system of denoting time. Sir Sandford Fleming. And that's why the title of the book is so beautiful, because Sir Sandford Fleming, it's Time Lord. Okay. He was a lord in the British Empire. He missed a train in Ireland in 1870 something. And he missed it because a typo put PM instead of AM. And he said, something has to be done about this. Okay. In that gem of a book, Time Lord, there is an account of some English country person who sees, I don't know if it was for the first time or not, sees a train going through the English countryside and has the thought, the realization, the exclamation, feudalism is dead. Or we could say parochialism is dead. Or we could say globalism is born. A terrible beauty is born. This sudden increase in connectivity, in the ability to transport goods and people with such speed and in such volume. A terrible beauty is born. And so the struggle for existence, the struggle to survive, which is what I have usually understood civilization to be, that civilization removes us from the struggle against nature, this dependency, complete dependency on the weather, on whether nature will produce a crop or not, this complete dependence and vulnerability on nature. That was the struggle of civilization, to overcome this living on the verge of not having enough. And of course, we would want that not just for ourselves, although that's a pretty good thing, but we would want it for everybody. Every one of us has all they need. And when we got there, it wasn't enough. We kept going. There is part of us who wants to just keep conquering. What else can we do? The ancients, and by the ancients I mean ancient Greece and Rome, there's also ancient China and ancient Persia and ancient India. The ancients' view of the four virtues, and there are many more than four, but four cardinal or main virtues, was that they operated on three levels, or they operated for three purposes. To give us a harmonious relationship with ourselves, to give us a harmonious relationship with others, and to give us a harmonious relationship with the world. That, perhaps, is civilization, or at least that could be used as a testing paper, a litmus test for how well a civilization is doing. Does it promote a harmonious relationship for the individual with him or herself? A harmonious relationship for the individual with others, and a harmonious relationship for the individual and society at large, a harmonious relationship with nature. Maybe the great battle then has been lost. I don't know. And in that sense, ancient Greece and Rome, with that kind of stoical understanding, they were kind of moving in a Taoist direction, where the cardinal virtues operating on these three levels are all about harmony. Harmony within the individual, harmony within the group, and harmony within the natural world. Have we moved too much away from that? Or are we acting in accordance with it? One of my favorite stories, it's a little bit like this guy, I don't know who it was, who saw the train going through the English countryside and exclaimed, "Feudalism is dead." I had one of those moments. And I'm pretty sure it was in maybe 20 years ago. I was going to give a year, but then I'm not too sure that was the year. 20 years ago or so. I was in Dublin, in the city, and there was a downpour. So I stepped into a shop doorway. You know the way they have a little part? You step in off the street and there's a hallway and then there's the doorway into the shop. So I stepped into the hallway, sheltering from the rain with 4 or 5 other people. And I looked into the shop window and the shoes, sports shoes. And there was a poster on the wall of an athlete crouched, ready to sprint. And there was a hand with the starting pistol in it. And the caption at the end was just, "Aha." The caption underneath this picture said, "We shape the things we build. Thereafter, they shape us." And what it was getting at was clear enough. If you buy these shoes, they will shape you into being a world-class athlete. We shape the things we build. Thereafter, they shape us. I've heard numerous teachers say that when you start to practice, you see the Dharma everywhere. At least that seems to be the case once practice begins to take hold. And so I saw it in this store window. We also have in the ceremony, precept ceremony, where somebody receives the Bodhisattva precepts, we have the phrase, "From now on, all beings are your teacher," or "From now on, all being is your teacher." When you're practicing, every situation becomes an opportunity to practice. If you're standing waiting for your train, that's an opportunity to practice. If you're sitting in the dentist chair, that's an opportunity to practice. If you're watching a movie, that's an opportunity to practice. If you're preparing food, that's an opportunity to practice. If you're changing the wheel on your car, that's an opportunity to practice. If you're late for your bus, that's an opportunity to practice. And gradually, more and more of our life's activities come within the domain of our practice. So, we shape the things we build. Thereafter, they shape us. From that, I could see, of course, we build television sets and we mass produce them, and then we become a nation of couch potatoes. We've gone further than that, and we have produced laptops. And I'm not too sure what the hip phrase for somebody who spends the day on a laptop would be. It's not a couch potato, it's something else. But that's what we become. The technology shapes our life. If the barometer for civilization is this harmony within ourselves, within our community, within our planet, does the technology help or hinder? And maybe the technology does neither. But what does help? That's a really good question. If you go to a Zen temple to do a practice period, there you have a situation where the buildings have all been shaped in a certain way. The rooms have been given a certain shape or structure. Bell, mukugyo, altar, statue, the floor layout, the cushions and the mats. And this shape shapes us. It helps us to create that harmony within ourselves, that harmony within our community, and hopefully that harmony with the natural world. The Buddhist formulation I suppose the nearest thing would be the 5 spiritual faculties. If you read the life of the Buddha, you'll come across them. And if you want a deeper exploration of them, I highly recommend Bhikkhu Thanasaro's book, The Wings to Awakening. The 5 spiritual faculties: Shraddha, or confidence; energy, or effort; mindfulness, concentration, and wisdom. Interesting that pop culture, current pop culture, has just taken one of those, mindfulness. And because it has only taken one of those, it doesn't really have a direction. Or maybe it does, but it doesn't have the direction from which that one spiritual faculty, the group from which it is extracted. A little bit like Plato's sense of justice is that it balances and regulates the other virtues. The 5 spiritual faculties, one of them on its own is not enough. And the direction of the Buddhist precepts, and here we have differences. In one school of Buddhism, you've got the 10 precepts. In Theravadan lay practice, you've got the 5 precepts. In Zen and other schools of Buddhism, you have the 16 precepts. And in early Theravadan Buddhism, or simply in Theravadan Buddhism for the ordained Sangha, you've got, I'm actually forgetting it now, 256 and 326 rules rather than virtues. So in Zen we have the 16 Bodhisattva precepts. And in Theravadan Buddhism you have the 5 precepts, or you have, for the ordained Sangha, 256, I think, and 326. These rules, primarily, if you're talking about the 256 and 326, these rules primarily create the situation for harmonious living within the Sangha, rather than being broad principles. In the 16 Bodhisattva precepts, we're getting more towards broad principles rather than specific rules. But if you go to live in a temple, you'll find that there is also specific rules, such as being in the zendo being in the zendo at the end of the second roll down of the Han. So before the second roll down of the Han, you should be in the zendo. That's a rule. And if you're not, you go around to the back door and wait until the doshi comes in, offers incense, and does their standing bows to take their seat. When you hear the bells for that, 3 bells, then you can enter in through the back door. That's another rule. So if you put all these little rules together, you might end up with 256. I don't know. These little rules, the Shingi, vary from temple to temple. And maybe even within the same temple from practice period to practice period. But they create the network of social harmonizing. And in creating that network, it also supports the internal harmonizing. So as we look at the precepts, it's a way of establishing a relationship to ourself to others and to the world, not to take what is not given. Not to kill. And so forth. The internal harmony is beautifully expressed in the phrase being upright. That's not just the internal harmony, that's the internal harmony that allows you to be harmonious with other people. And it's the harmony, the internal harmony, that allows you to be harmonious with nature. So in Mahayana Buddhism, we have the 6 perfections. The second one is the perfection of ethical training, or the perfection of ethics. I spoke last week a little bit about, or maybe a lot, can't really remember, a little bit about giving and the perfection of giving, dana paramita. I spoke about the interconnectedness of being and how in a situation of giver, receiver, and gift, they're all empty. And you cannot say that one is more important than the other. Without a receiver, there is no gift. Without a receiver, there can be no giver. And there is something in us that wants to give. So I'm trying to remember what it was that Sangha said are the 6 things a bodhisattva gives. The first thing, as I remember, is material goods. And I think the rest follow like this. Number 1 is material goods. Number 2 is the bodhisattva gives of him or herself. So they give of their energy. The third thing is education and culture. Now, in the giving of education and culture, they would also be giving of themselves. And in the giving of material things, they could also be giving of themselves. So I'm not quite sure that I have number 2 correct. Number 3, education and culture. Number 4, life and limb. And that's one possible extreme case of giving of themselves. This desire to give. Number 4 is life and limb. Number 5, fearlessness. And number 6, wisdom. So if we look at this, it can be tempting to think that somebody is a better bodhisattva than me. I should say, it can be tempting for somebody to think that somebody else is a better bodhisattva than they are. It can be tempting to think, I'm not really a good bodhisattva. This to me is very mistaken. It's trying to identify the self as a bodhisattva. Well, I've received the bodhisattva vows, doesn't that make me a bodhisattva? Or, I'm not really a good person, I couldn't receive those vows, I could never be a bodhisattva. There's a mistake here. In identifying yourself either as a bodhisattva or as not being a bodhisattva. To elaborate on this a little bit, I once asked Reb in Doksan, I think this was about the time that somebody's book came out called Zen at War. I asked Reb, are there bodhisattvas in the army? His answer, as always, was brilliant. He said, there are bodhisattvas wherever there is an opening of the heart. And then he said, in fact, that's what a bodhisattva is. So the bodhisattva is not the person. Bodhisattva is the opening of the heart. To me, it's the set of conditions that lead to that. And practice makes that much more likely. Much more likely that we will have an opening of the heart. This is something to remember when you're in the dentist's chair. You may be thinking, this dentist is such a wonderful bodhisattva. No, what you mean is they're really good at being a dentist. To the extent that they are present and practicing, yes, they're a bodhisattva, but they need you to practice. To the extent that you are practicing, you're a bodhisattva. To the extent that you are being present, you are being a bodhisattva. And you are creating the conditions in which there can be an opening of the heart. Doctor and patient, need each other, not for the obvious temporal arrangement of things. They need each other so that there can be an opening of the heart. And when you are practicing in your role as a patient, you are part of the bodhisattva-ness of things. That's the perfection of giving. As Suzuki Roshi says in Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, just not to attach to anything is to give. Following the precepts, allowing them to inform your consciousness, allowing them to inform your actions and your thoughts and your speech. Following the precepts, reflecting on them, contemplating them, creates an inner harmony, an inner balance. And they culminate in being present. In the Pali Canon, the Buddha says, "Great is the fruit, great is the merit of meditation when it is set round by upright conduct. Great is the fruit, great is the merit of wisdom when it is set round by meditation." The perfection of the precepts, the precepts are a kind of setting of boundaries, particularly if you look at the 256, if you look at the Ingen-ji of a temple, the setting and establishing of boundaries. But those boundaries change slightly from temple to temple. So it's not the actual particular rule that does it, but the fact that there are rules. They're the setting of boundaries. And the foundation of those boundaries, or those boundaries are the foundation of respect. Not to take what is not given, or simply not to take what is not yours. Having this respect and this ability to contain our impulses to grasp and to grab and to overreach our boundaries. And it is the perfection of this that leads to intimacy. A deep and profound intimacy within ourselves, within our community, within the community of fellow practitioners, and between that community and the world. It's this respect for boundaries, this establishment and respect for this is mine and this is yours. a wonderful book that I would like to recommend if you haven't read it already is Ken Wilber's No Boundary. I think the question was directed to Mel Weitzman Sojun, abbot of Berkeley Zen Center. What is intimacy? And he said, respect for boundaries. What is enlightenment? And he said, no boundary. And then I think he said the character, I may be wrong, but there seems to be a character in Japanese that is the same for intimacy and for enlightenment. Enlightenment is intimacy. Intimacy is enlightenment. One is coming at it from the side of respect for boundaries, and the other is coming at it from the side of there is no boundary. So although there is no boundary, we respect boundaries. Although there is the absolute, we live in the relative. Thank you very much.